This is Greg over at Pourmore. Today we've got an exciting guest joining us. We're bringing High Wire Distilling on. Scott Blackwell from High Wire will be joining us momentarily. There's Scott. There we go. Scott, how you doing today?
All right, how's it going?
Doing good. It's like nice. It kind of cooled down a little bit where I am. It's been pretty hot, so it's nice to kind of cool down a little bit.
Yeah, same here. It rained the last 2 nights, and went outside this morning with the dog, and it was nice and cool. And by about 10 a.m., the sun had come out, and the humidity started to pop again. So it's getting, it's not quite sauna level, but
Yeah.
it. Hey, I'm not complaining. This is our favorite time of year here.
And you guys are calling from South Carolina, right?
From Charleston. So
Charleston.
yeah,
Okay.
it's a subtropical environment in the summertime here. So it's I grew up in the South. I'm from Greenville originally,
Okay.
and so I'm used to a little bit of swampiness and a little bit of heat, humidity.
I'm in
But
Atlanta. I'm over Atlanta, so I get it.
yeah. So I think it's funny when I go out west or whatever, and it's 100 degrees, and I'm like, this doesn't feel like
Yeah,
100 degrees.
it's a different animal.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks for joining us today. The High Wire Distilling, we sent out bottles of the Jimmy Red whiskey to our Bourbon Club subscribers last month. And so we
Awesome.
invited Scott to come on here and join us and talk through where they came from and what we sent out to our subscribers. So thanks for joining.
Yeah. Happy to be here. And thanks for sending out the whiskey. This is an exciting time for us. I'm jumping ahead maybe here, but we make everything ourselves. We don't source anything. And I tell people that we're a 10-year startup. We've been around for 12, but it took us, those first 2 years were sort of almost like
Yeah.
totally wandering around in the dark. And then, we started to sort of make some direction. But then you've got to make the whiskey and
So let's talk about where it comes from. So, my favorite question is we've all sat around a campfire saying, you know what, we should make our own whiskey. And most of the time it never happens, but obviously you made it happen. So what was the difference? What made you guys say, we need to make a whiskey, we need to make something ourselves? Talk us through that.
well, the long story is long, but I'm going to go with a shorter version. It's still a little long. We had a business before this, and we had venture capital in that business eventually because it was growing so fast we just couldn't keep up with the cash flow. So we brought in that venture capital. Usually when you do that, that sort of signals that you're more or less going to sell the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the last 2 years of that business, we knew that we were going to sell. We were already getting inbounds from larger companies, and we knew it was just a matter of time. So we started thinking about what's next. And I've been a craft beer fan since I'm just going to go ahead and date myself, but also date the craft beer industry, late 80s. So, we're talking when it was in its
The
major
real early
infancy.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd always really I just thought, the wine business is really cool. Of course, here in the South, we don't, it's not really a wine region where we are. Craft beer to me was like sort of the next exciting beverage that I could get into in South Carolina. So fast forward, we're making beer at home. I'm buying more and more home brew equipment like kegging systems and all this. And when Ann and I got married, I made all the beer for our rehearsal dinner.
That's
It was
awesome.
just way into it. And I was into like Belgian style beers, like and Kolsch's and more yellow, but interesting yellow beer.
Okay.
But in those days, it was more about hoppy beers, and I thought, well, this will be how we're going to be different. We're going to do this, and Anne humored it for a couple of years, and eventually she sort of sheepishly said, I'm looking at the data. I'm always looking at the craft beer data. And always at the bottom, there's a couple sentences about craft distilling. What do you think about us doing spirits? And if you've ever came to South Carolina pre-2006 and went to a restaurant or bar, you would have ordered a drink. It would have come in a mini bottle. You would have gotten a mini, because our back bars were all mini bottles. It was like really weird when now it would be like so foreign. You'd walk in and see those little mini bottles. So the spirits industry was not that interesting to me. I was not a spirits guy. I was not really, I liked gin a lot, but wasn't that, my interest had gone more towards beer and wine. And Ann was more of the bourbon drinker in our family. And she said, I think there's something here. And, wouldn't it be cool if we could make our own whiskey? And then fast forward to probably 18 months into the business, I looked at her and I said, hey, I was intimidated. I'm like, hey, this is hard. Do you think maybe we High West was doing a really great job with their brand, and they, were all sourced, very transparent about that. And I said, maybe while we're doing this, maybe we should source whiskey while we make our own stuff, while we learn. Smart. Gives us a little bit of training wheels, if you will. And she said, I really don't want to do that. When will we ever cut that cord? Because that becomes our brand. That's not, how do we differentiate? So we made that decision early on. And, it was, I don't want to make it sound like a sob story or whatever, but it was really tough there for a long time,
No.
of sort of wandering in the wilderness and trying to figure out what we were going to bring to the party, if you will, that was unique, that really brought something interesting and new to the category. Yeah.
That's to me. I love the approach. It's a bigger risk, right? When you're just going to do your own stuff, you got to wait a while, see what comes out. How much, how many different barrels did you lay down to start?
Yeah, so I didn't understand the relationship between raw ingredient and the alcohol that came out of the still. It's always clear when it comes out. That's a big question we get. And when I would see, I hadn't been to a lot of distilleries, but when I saw it coming out and it's like trickling out, I thought, that's not how much flavor is really in that was in that raw ingredient. And it's, it's kind of like watching water boil.
Yeah.
It's, you watch that for, 30 seconds, you're, check. I don't need to see that again. It's not that interesting. But when you taste that White Dog and you understand where, what it started with, that's when it's kind of interesting. That's
really is fascinating.
I didn't have that background. I didn't have, that, I didn't grow up in the distilling, and, here we didn't have distilleries. So, so in the early days, we had a organic and natural bakery before this. So we made packaged food. So we made cookie dough, biscuits, cinnamon rolls, of place and bake dough that you would buy at a retail store like a Pillsbury or Nestle, and you'd bake it off at home. So we created a gluten and dairy-free line of cookies. And in that, I used a combination of sorghum and rice flour. Okay. And sorghum, a lot of people don't know what sorghum is. It's sort of a southern thing. It came over from Africa, probably in the 1600s, 1700s, and like we got peanuts and watermelons and things of that nature. So it was part of that diaspora. And so sorghum, though, is gluten-free. We weren't really trying to make gluten-free whiskey, but we were like, let's just see what sorghum tastes like. just because this is something completely different. Nobody's doing this that we knew of. And when we put the sorghum in and put it in the fermenter, it was like a completely different flavor
That's
profile.
awesome.
And we distilled it, and then we put it in barrels, and it was more like banana nut bread, sort of.
Interesting.
And people were going nuts over it. They're like, "Wow, this sorghum, whatever." Not we thought is that how many. This is cool. It's interesting, and it really informed us. But people didn't know how to say it, didn't know what it
Right.
was,
Right.
and you kind of end up in that part of the store that's this other specialty, not in the bourbon or rye section. And we thought, is this going to, alt whiskeys, quinoa, millet, all those things, that was all sort of happening.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you look at the data, and we had gotten really schooled on data because of the grocery business, it was like bourbon is by far and away the big kahuna.
Sure.
And then behind that, you had rye. And yeah, rye's been coming on, but it's not bourbon. And then, you had American single malt, which wasn't even really a class at that moment, and really hasn't been until recently. And then behind that, we made some rum because we're in a coastal town, and we thought rum would be big, in a port city. It wasn't so big. And we were making whiskey with 100% heirloom white corn, because people down here, make grits, these mills. And if you're a really good miller, you make about 50% of what you mill for grits.
Yeah.
And then the other 50% is meal. Well, there's not enough cornbread being made to consume all that meal. So we were buying cornmeal from a company that made breading and cornmeal for cornbread and stuff like that. And that was almost like waste for them. So
Yeah.
we were getting that
Great. It's a great system, but you go to the circular whiskey economy.
Yeah. And it was interesting to make all those different things and then taste the sort of cause and effect, if you will, but nothing was really hitting a chord like, this is so unique and so different. And the word local is important, but who cares if we make whiskey from local ingredients when you're in New York and you see our stuff on a shelf? It's not local to them. So we knew enough about it to be like, okay, we have to be similar enough in a category, but we need to bring something different to that category. And that was sort of the tough question that kept me awake at night for those first few months. And we also didn't understand the effects of aging of barrels, because we had never done it. So we would put things in barrels and taste throughout the year and just sort of say, okay, is this going in the right direction?
Yeah.
A lot of trial and error, but that's very
How quickly?
common.
So when you're testing it that frequently, how early in the aging process do you start to get a feel for where that whiskey's going to be?
We learned a lot about there again, that relationship of sort of ingredient. We started to be able to identify, okay, I used a method I used to be in the coffee business.
Okay.
And I was a coffee roaster, and in those days, there was nobody in South Carolina roasting coffee. So I was there again, kind of in the wilderness. And so I taught myself I would read articles and things of that nature. And cupping was one of those things that, you do when you're selecting green beans and stuff like that, when you're buying, like you basically get a lot of Sumatran coffee and you're tasting those green beans. You have a little micro roaster and you're doing this
Um,
cupping thing.
right.
So I started using that method with grain and cupping different varieties of corns, different varieties of rye, different varieties of wheats. Then we would distill those things, and then you could taste the white dog, and then get it in a barrel, even within 6, 8 months, start to see where it was sort of heading and going, okay, this tasted really good as white dog. So there's a pretty high likelihood, and it had these notes in that cupping uh, kind of process. So ultimately, that flavor that we're seeing now that it's been in a barrel for a minute is sort of the hunch starts to get, I guess your hunch or your gut gets stronger.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's sort of where we are now, where we can, we're sort of at chapter 3 of that, or 3.0, if you want to put it in, MS DOS. Uh,
Command prompt line, is that what we're?
right, right. So we're sort of at that place now with that process. I will say that, what eventually dawned on us that we were very interested in sort of 2 steps back with the agriculture and with the ingredient and more about that flavor at that point. And that kind of came naturally, I think, because of our culinary background, and less about chemistry. The distilling part is interesting, and it's still, cool to me how it happens and what happens. I would say that it's also the part, that, I've done plenty of it, and it's
Mhm.
still fairly boring to me. That 8 hours, 9
Yeah.
hours of the distillation, it's cool to watch it the first couple of times. Then I'm like, okay, yep. Yeah, it's like, but I'm more interested probably in fermentations and the farming aspect and sort of the soil and, getting nerdy with the
I love that. I
varieties.
mean, that's, the when it comes down to differentiating the space, the core ingredients are where it's at. It's not just the mash bill, but where it's come from and where you're driving to. So, I mean, I love that you're getting down to the ingredient level of what makes a difference. So, what I most noted, right? So we were talking about Jimmy Red, which is the product today, and coming from the Jimmy Red corn, is that right? So
Yeah.
what? How did you find your way to the Jimmy Red corn?
So that's a good question. So, because I've danced all around that. So it's really the best example of kind of us putting a foot forward, and a stake in the ground. And so during that first 3 months in business, we had started distilling in June. We opened our doors in September. So those first 3 months I'm referring to were from September to December. But
Okay.
between June and the end of the year, we had distilled, I don't know, probably 15 to 20 distillations. So it wasn't like, massive, but we had started to, quickly understand that relationship between that ingredient and that end flavor.
Mhm.
And we were, like I mentioned, using this white meal, this heirloom corn variety. But it was not really, to me, like remarkable per se. It was good, but it was just like, this isn't that remarkable. And in the meantime, I'm reading all these online forums, and all these people are talking about, there's a lot of people on there that are very opinionated and talking about, well, you mash bills, and I'm going to use 17% wheat, and I'm going to use wheat and rye, or I'm going to use for my flavoring grains. And I noticed, I knew this about bourbon that, 51% or more corn, but usually you're in the 70s. So I was just sort of like, there again, understanding it more from that ingredient place, going, well, if the corn is 75% of the mash bill, why is that? Is that just sugar? What is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So I thought maybe the thing to do is to sort of start there
Mm.
and start with a corn that has maybe some different properties and has something interesting that it's bringing to the party. And then we'll decide later, wheat or rye. So we said, who do we know that knows a lot about corn? Well, there's a guy named Glenn Roberts who owns a company called Anson Mills, and Anson Mills sells to chefs all over the country and works with quote unquote landrace heirloom grains. Originally Carolina Gold rice, which was grown all around this area, long grain, non-aromatic rice. And then, of course, grits. He sells a lot of cornmeal and a lot of grits. And we knew was in the area. I mean, his mill is in Columbia, South Carolina, which is about an hour and a half away. And he is down here a lot. So we said, and we had met him at a slow food event. So we said, we should reach out to him and learn more about corn. Long story short, we called him in that December. He said, meet me down at Clemson at the research farm south of town next month, January of 14. So at that point, it was me and Ann and one other guy. That was it in this distillery. So I left the distillery so Ann and this other guy could stay behind and man the ship. And I went down to meet with Glenn, and he had a 8-foot table, folding table there, just loaded with bags of seeds, and went through slowly all the different varieties and told me about what the flavor profiles were, the texture, all that kind of stuff. And I kept looking at the middle of the table because there's a bag of red corn, and I was like, but he hadn't gotten to that one, and he's finished up, the 40 or 50 other varieties. And I said, well, what's this one? And he said, oh, yeah, that's Jimmy Red, James Island Red. James Island is right across the river over here. Okay. And he said, yeah, that's the one you want. That's and he was sort of saving the best for last. And I said, great. Yeah, we would love to get some of that and make some whiskey. And he's like, well, how much do you need? And I said, our original still was about 500 gallons. I said, so we need about 800 to 1,000 pounds. And he was like, you guys are grain hogs. That's and it doesn't exist. And I was like,
so
okay.
there was no way to get that kind of volume.
No. And I was like, bummer, because I was excited to it's like we're paying rent every month. We're paying,
yeah.
We also kind of, hurry up and wait, got to get it in a barrel and wait, So I was, like, okay, well, and he's like, yeah, you're going to have to grow it. Maybe Brian, Dr. Brian Ward, who was running Clemson at that point, the research farm, he said, maybe Brian will grow it here for you. I'll give you the seed. But he'll grow it, and you guys will have to write a check. And I mean, you're going to probably write a pretty big check to get Brian to do that. And I was like, okay. We'd already been over budget and everything else opening up. And I said, well, we need to do that. We'll do that. How, we decided we were going to grow about 2.5 acres, and I agreed to, we were going to proceed at that meeting. And I went back to the distillery, and Ann's like, how did it go? I said, it's great. There's this corn. And I told her all about it. And I said, they're going to grow it. And they said, we're going to have to write a check to them. And, and she said, well, how much? And I said, I didn't really get the number. But I was like, we have to do this. It's R&D. It's not really price per pound at that point. And at the end of the day, Brian and those guys were very kind to us. It was, it was not unfair at all. And
they were reviving there. They had to create a whole new species, not create new, but they had to revive an old species for you.
Right. And I had not really been on farms. I mean, I've driven by them and I've drank beer in a cornfield, at night, but I've not really, ever seen a plant go from a seed to, full on 10, 12 foot tall plant. So I went down for the planting of the seed, ran behind the tractor, taking photos. I was excited. So every week I would go and watch it come up, 3 more, 6 more inches. We grew it organically. So we flamed the fields one morning, where we burn all the weeds in between, and very dramatic and all that. So it was really fun and exciting there again. And during this period, we were distilling, other types of corn, rye, wheats, things of that nature, malted rye, unmalted rye, and just sort of educating ourselves, and also trying to figure out what we were going to sell. We were making gin. We had vodka because we had gin, so we were selling that at the bar. It was pretty I would say modest at that point, what we could do. So a lot banking on this. And fast forward to that September when we finally went to harvest, we were all so excited, and we got our local F&B crowd to come out there and help us, because we hand broke it, or harvested that fall. And so we had a chef come out and make a big breakfast and out in the field, and we got some great photos from that harvest. So anyway, we ended up milling. Glenn milled it for us at Anson. We didn't even have a mill. He milled it and sent us the meal, and we would make a mash, and then he would send us some more meal, and we would make another mash. And then we kept the rest of it for seed for the following year. And I remember when I was mashing it, I was like, whoa, this is so different than the yellow or white corn we've been messing with. And then in the fermentation, it really started to get different. Had, nut, peanut, butter kind of, notes, and it had more of a honey sweetness as opposed to sugar, more earthy, whatever. We made it at 100% corn so that we could understand what it tasted like without wheat or rye.
Yeah, we'll go all the way in. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when it came off the still, it had this gigantic oil cap in the fermenter, and all that, everything moves across into the still. So when it was coming off the still, it just had a viscous, kind of more viscosity to it. So it just sort of coated your tongue and had a richer flavor. And I was like, okay, this is so different. This is exciting. I hope this does really well in a barrel. So we put it in barrels. We only had the 2, and we would taste those barrels, and friends would come in and we would taste them. And this got to be, 14, 16 months old, and people were like, man, this is so good. This is so. And then we had whiskey buddies that were coming in and saying, and I was like, do you think wheat or rye? Should we put wheat or rye with it? And they were like, you know what? I don't know that it needs it. This is really interesting, just like it is. And
So is this still 100% corn mash bill?
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So it, fast forward a few months later, we were at Palmetto Bluff at a event that they did every fall, and we shared a house with Julian and Sissy Van Winkle. And Julian and I were chatting one night, and he said, tell me about this red corn you guys are doing. We had known Julian and Sissy through Southern Foodways Alliance. We're part of that group. It's out of Mississippi. And so I said, well, it's red corn. It's a red corn, and told him the story. And he said, well, send me a bottle of the White Dog, if you would. So we packed up a flask and shipped it. And Ann, at that point, was getting all the FedEx notices when things delivered. And sure enough, it delivered. And then we don't talk to Julian and Sissy regularly or anything like that. But I walk over, and my phone had a missed call and 2 text messages from him. And he says, call me. And Ann's like, yeah, he just got his package 15 minutes ago. And so I call him and he's like, hey, I just got the White Dog and I just got to tell you, my mind's kind of blown. He's like, what's in here, wheat or rye? What's your flavoring grain? I said, it's 100% corn. He's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. And then he starts asking about yeast and barrels and saying, you're not going to put it in those small barrels, are you? And, what proof are you going in at? And where is it coming off the still? And, he's asking, so I'm like, he's not humoring me.
No, he's
He's
going deep.
actually interested.
Yeah, he's going deep. Yeah.
And he eventually is like, you know what? I'm just going to tell you, this is the best White Dog I've ever had in my life. He's like, this is really interesting. You're on to something here. And so it just continued. So Bill Thomas up at
Did you get
Jack
that frame,
Rose.
by the way? Did you get that frame somewhere that Julian Van Winkle says the best White Dog he's ever had?
It's somewhere. He went on his own, after that and would be at whiskey tastings and be in front of a group of people and start talking about our whiskey. And then he got quoted in Whiskey Advocate. It was the one whiskey he talked about. So I was like, and he's gone on since then, and he's been to the distillery. He came in shortly thereafter. He was playing golf down here at Kiowa and stopped in and said, can we pull some stuff out of a barrel? And so we didn't have anything very old. So I pulled some whiskey out. He's like, what's this, like 4 years old? And I said, no, it's like 14 months. And he's like, this stuff just drinks older. There's just that mouthfeel. And so he continued to say, hey, this is, I'll be curious to see when this stuff gets some age on it, what it's going to do. So, and Bill Thomas at Jack Rose up in DC, same kind of thing. It's just on and on and on. And a lot of chef friends would come in and talk about it. And it just really, was cheerleading that was necessary at that point because we had no money coming in off of it. It was just hope.
Yeah.
And so we felt like it might be good, but, until people actually lay down cash that aren't friends that are saying it's good, that's when you know that, okay, well, maybe we're on to something here. Yeah. We, have refined that plan, refined our farming. We have gone on now where we are growing with 4 partner farms here, right, about an hour inland. This year we'll grow about 500 acres of Jimmy Red. So we've gone a long way from not having 1,000 pounds to having well over 1 million pounds of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, now I'm intrigued. Now we have to get into tasting. I have to get into some of this stuff. So we can now we've laid the groundwork. We've got to get in so we can talk about what we're looking at. All right. So we've got the High Wire Distilling, Jimmy Red, straight bourbon whiskey, 47.5%.
Yep. 95 proof. Yep.
Let's get in. So I'm definitely getting the grain.
Oh yeah.
Nutty and definitely sweet. And getting do you get citrus like orange a little bit sometimes or
Yeah, there's like orange peel.
Yeah, orange peel.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I don't ever tell people what they're getting. Everybody's got their own palate, and sometimes after lunch, depends on what you had for lunch, that kind of thing. The classic kind of notes that we tend to get are like graham. We get a little bit of that brown sugar.
Sure.
Cinnamon or spice, baking spice.
Now I'm getting like honey and some apple a little bit, like a
Yeah. 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 It's that more, it's not like just a straight up sugar, um, or corn, uh, kind of like quote unquote corn sweetness or whatever per se.
You know what I
Um,
really enjoyed is it really kind of like maybe it's because we talked about the oiliness, but like it slowly moves, right?
yeah.
It's not a spike. I don't get it like all the way up in my nasal cavity. It's like
Yeah.
slowly coating its way downward as I
Yeah.
go. It really is like a ongoing experience. It's a
Yeah.
delicious flavor.
It's a very different, it's different, which is the whole point. And the classic, just, the reason it's called classic is we used to have this label, it said revival.
Hmm.
Looks like that.
Okay.
So that's the original. That revival was on all our whiskeys. It was on the Jimmy Red. It was on everything. It was just, and our whole thing was we didn't know who we were. We didn't know what. We didn't, really have Jimmy Red, on the business plan. Original. That was what we put the sorghum in. It was what we put all those things. So it was around the whole revival, seed revival, if you will. And so Jimmy Red went on, after that first release of those 2 barrels. We sold out in 10 minutes when we put those barrels on sale. It was crazy. The fever pitch was built up. It was crazy. It was great. We also had been growing it in laying down additional barrels, but we
Good.
didn't, release any. We released, that in probably, I think it was 2018. We won the Garden and Gun Made in the South award.
Oh, that one.
We
Yeah.
won for beverage, but then we won the overall. And the judges basically told us the reason that we got that was not just because, it was a solid whiskey, but mainly because it was like bringing something new to the whiskey industry, American whiskey. And so it was more of like all of that combined. It
Yeah.
wasn't like this is the best whiskey we've ever had. It was like,
Yeah.
no, this is cool, and that it's innovative, and so therefore we're going to award this. So at that point, we were selling out whiskey as fast as we could get to an age where we could dump it more or less.
Yeah.
And as we evolved, that original whiskey was like 2 years and 1 second old, so barely straight. We didn't want to release anything that wasn't a straight bourbon. And then fast forward to February of 20, we moved from our original building into the building I'm sitting in now, which is 23,000 square feet. We upgraded our still, so we went from a 500-gallon still to a 2,300-gallon still, 2,300 gallon mash ferments. The whole, everything's lined up now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we could lay down about 6 barrels a day. Those are 53-gallon barrels. We were laying down in the old location 1.3 barrels a day, but we weren't even making whiskey every day. We were
Yeah.
making whiskey like 2 to 3 days a week.
It's amazing what a few years can do, and you get some momentum behind you, and you move into a 23,000 square foot building. I mean, that is a tremendous success. So congrats to
Yeah.
you and Ann for that work. That is amazing.
Yeah. So that classic is really that original, quote unquote, what was in the revival, but it's just gotten older as we've gotten older. So we've continued. So that batch number that is on the side of the bottle, we always put a batch number on there.
48.
Yeah. So that batch number is really critical because, if you've got batch 20, that's going to be younger whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because back then we would have been probably putting 2.75-year-old whiskey in the bottle. As we've gone on, we've got we're at batch 48. That's about 4 years old. We could slide and go, okay, back blend and put a 4.25-year-old barrel in and a 3.75-year-old barrel in, and we're not really specifically stuck on age. It's about flavor at that point and
I was
what's
going to
going to.
ask, if you're with all the blending multi years, are you looking to produce a certain, like, is each batch its own thing, or are you looking to hold a flavor profile across them?
I mean, generally speaking, I think we're getting to a place where the flavor profile is generally settling in.
Okay.
But the classic is kind of, kind of that, 55. It's as low as $49 in this area. It gets
Okay.
as much as $59 in some places. It's kind of that, like, well, I can use it in a cocktail, but I can also sip it type of thing.
Yeah.
And
No, it
and
stands up on its own, and I love the uniqueness of the flavor and that. I mean, you're right; it would stand up in a cocktail for sure, but I feel like the that oily character I think will probably the mouth coat of it is really tremendous.
yeah.
Yeah,
So we wanted to, we sort of realized after we looked around, and we're like, okay, now we've moved into this other building. We've been producing these barrels. We've got barrels that are anywhere from new make all the way to 8 years old.
hmm
And so now we can kind of look at like how the big boys create expressions,
yeah,
and not just based on finishings. We can so we decided, one of our first sort of pure expressions was going to be bottled and bond. Bottled and bond has to be a minimum of 4, made in the same season, same distillery, all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So we said we've got consistently 4-year-old barrels coming at us every week, and last year, because we had moved in this building in 20. So we were here for a little over 4.5 years when we decided to release that. So we had the inventory coming at us, and we thought, let's put out a bottled and bond. And then last fall we released an age stated 7-year-old bottle, in a ceramic. It's a ceramic bottle
Oh, cool.
with that's got embossing on it with Jimmy Red, Charleston, South Carolina. It's a keepsake, and
Is that the bottled and bond one, or that's different?
that's
Okay.
different. So
Okay.
that's a 7-year-old. Yeah, it's just a 7-year-old, age stated,
Got it.
107 proof, and that is what went bananas on a lot of people's sites last year. It was limited. I think we only put out 1,700 bottles, something like that.
I see it now.
Yeah. So we're going to be, well, so the, sort of the, because we make our own stuff, we're not that old. We're just sort of crawling towards that. But
Yeah.
classic is going to be sort of that. I think it's a really solid kind of gateway, if you will, or intro to our brand. But from there, there's some other stuff that's definitely, like the bottled and bond is a little bit of a bigger whiskey, a little more layered, a little longer finish, things of that nature. So it's a step up. We also do an Oloroso sherry finish. We were interested in, the single grain, single malt whiskey, type thing, and looking at Scotch and thinking about a classic finish, Oloroso being that kind of nutty, kind of flavor we thought might be
I've
kind
got
of fun.
the Oloroso right here, sample
Yep.
bottle. Thank you again. I'm going to go ahead and, since we're
Yeah.
talking about it, might as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, I'm mentioning these things because you've got these in your place there. And so bottled and bond, Oloroso sherry, and then the thought here is that it's sort of a nod to that sort of single malt type of finish, and it just brings another. I think for us, finishing is all about having another layer or another flavor profile that kind of accentuates. So it's like building a dish. Whenever you're cooking, you've got your fat, your salt, your acid, you're trying to like kind of think about, if you're cooking, you always want you got a lot of fat in there, you need some acid,
Yeah.
and so it's that same kind of thing. I think, I mean, it should be across beverages as well.
I'm
So,
getting way more kind of nutty flavor here,
yeah.
as well as I want to say kind of more of a cherry, like a red fruit kind of taste on top, which obviously is the Oloroso finish right there. That is kind of classic. But I mean, I love your perspective bringing in the chef mindset and the mixing of the flavors. Like it's such a fresh approach to layer of a finish on top of a whiskey that we don't normally get that kind of perspective. So I really do appreciate that.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't, I don't want to mislead you because we've definitely danced around. We've got barrels here. I mean, we've got like a lot of people. We've got barrels here from local beekeepers
Yeah.
that put honey in barrels. We put our whiskey back in it. We've never released it. It's delicious. It is like really, really interesting. Maybe one day we'll venture down that road.
We'll send a sample my way. We'll see if anyone else likes it. We'll see.
Yeah. And then maple syrup. We've got a barrel that had
Ooh.
maple syrup in it. They're again delicious. We've got some red wine barrels, some white wine barrels from a winemaker friend. So it's
I think you have all
definitely,
the best friends. Having a former food and chef background, you've got all the right friends to have.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and that's really originally where we um, really sort of hung out was in that, and chefs totally got what we were doing
Yeah.
and really applauded it. And like I say, they were the early adopters. And since then, and I do believe most of your bartenders these days are layering and building drinks and things of that nature, and they're thinking more with a culinary mindset as well, and sort of that ingredient approach. So we've definitely sort of folded into that really nicely, but we realize we're not going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
We don't make enough whiskey to be everywhere, and it's okay. We're at a place where we're sitting on about over 5,000 barrels now. We've got a rick house up in the naval base, about 4 miles from here
Cool.
on the Cooper River. So it's a brackish part of the river where it meets the port, and we're sitting on the about 100 yards from the water, and we've got 44 windows there. It's ambient, so it fluctuates with the seasons. And it's proper ricking, so all the barrels are sitting, on their sides with a lot of airflow around them. And when you walk in, it's just such a great smell. But what we're noticing is those barrels are aging differently than these barrels downtown are. Here we go in typically at 110 entry proof, mainly because of the heat, but also just the humidity and all that. Downtown, we're usually pulling barrels like for classic, they're usually in the 116-ish range.
Way more concentrated.
And then last week we dumped a barrel for the tasting room for a single barrel, and it was 127.
Okay.
That's probably the highest proof thing we've ever produced.
That's pretty. I want to try that one. That's what I want to.
And then what we noticed about the naval base though is, and just this is sort of we're just getting there. Most of those barrels are 5 years old and younger, but those barrels are not. They typically go down in proof at first, and then they go back up. Those barrels are kind of starting to level out at that 110 range and just sort of holding, and we're not really sure what that's going to be like, exactly. But
Why would it go down first?
well, I think between those sort of like noxious sort of higher, those lower boiling point
Yeah.
alcohols, sort of all your, heads, if you will, that early, kind of more fumy stuff with the heat that we have here sort of blows off, if you will.
Right.
There's some absorption into the wood. So, we're losing about 6% average a year angel share. And it's, this is where I'm not a scientist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we put shade cloth on all the windows over there to keep the sunlight out. But they're not like fancy windows. These are old, those old metal single pane.
Sure.
So there's definitely going to be different spots in that room. We're 6 from the floor, like Four Roses have, so we're 6 ricks from the floor.
Yeah.
And we did move in 19 to air seasoned staves. So we moved originally to minimum of 36 months. So those stave boards are, the raw stock is sitting out in the yard for at least 3 years, getting rained on and all that.
Oh yeah.
And so we know that has made a big difference in flavor profile. We've played around with toast profiles, char.
When they leave the staves out in the open air that to me is so interesting. It's just like just let nature do its thing, let it hit, let it absorb what's around it, and then does it go in the barrel or it becomes part of the barrel? Because it goes inside the barrel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the staves are, what make up the barrel. And
Yeah.
They sit out there. When they sit out in that yard, they're sort of raw, kind of like a board at that point. They're still squared off and, cut to a certain length, but they're just squared off like boards. And they stagger stack them. So there's air going between, and then, there again, that rain and all that. And then they take them in there and mill them down and basically steam them and get that curve that they get, but then they put the angles on so that they will form a barrel. And then from there, they're toasting, charring, all that kind of stuff. But the standard is a 3 to 6 month air seasoned. That's been the standard forever. But our winemaker friends were like, man, I wouldn't touch a barrel if it hadn't been air cured for at least 3 years.
Yeah.
And we were like, huh. And so the first people I called about that, a cooperage, big cooperage, I asked them about that, and they said, oh yeah, it doesn't make a difference. And I said, well, it seems like it's still liquid. They said wine's different than spirit. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still liquid in contact with wood. Ultimately, the wood is a ingredient, and it's macerating just like a tea bag. So, I've got to think that there's got to be a difference. And
chemistry wise, but there's got to be, right? There's just no way there can't be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all those sugars break down, the tannins, all that stuff out in that, it's like green wood versus, air cured wood. So it's, it's going to be different. And so, sure enough, we went into those new barrels in 19. The stuff that's coming out of those barrels now is better. I mean, it's just, you can say what you want.
Right.
It's just
you can't tell me how, but it is.
yeah. And barrel entry proof was sort of the same thing. We've messed around with different barrel entry proofs. I can tell you it makes a difference. You don't just randomly throw whiskey in a barrel and, just because it's been in a barrel or what type, Minnesota oak versus Missouri oak, it's different.
Yeah.
Because it's tighter rings in Minnesota, because it's a slower growing tree. it can be the same species, all that, you know. French oak, of course, is very different than American oak, you know, so it's all very sort of, you know, when you, there again, when you look at it more like as a, like, I think it's innate for, especially, you know, us, because we've think about things like we would like mushrooms or grape varieties or whatever, and you grow a Pinot grape in Southern California versus Washington State, and different types of soil, you know, different climate, different moisture level, all that, it's going to taste different. It's the same kind of thing with oak. I believe it ultimately has an impact on a lot of different variables in what we're doing. So
I poured the last one here, the bottle and bond you sent over. Now, is this the same? Is this the 10-year bottle and bond anniversary one?
Well, the 10-year was our first bottled and bond we ever did. Okay. And the reason we did that was we saw, let's do something that really sort of says that we're, you know, let's tell a story about the farm. Let's tell a story about the agriculture, and, you know, make that relationship with the whiskey. And at that point, we really had only, our earliest acreage would have been, like I say, that 2 acres at Clemson. Then we had a small family farm that was growing about 15 acres, but we had one family that was growing about 65 acres for us consistently from like 2015, 16 forward. So when we turned 10, Ann and I were like, let's maybe do a bottled and bond. What's going to be the best, you know, kind of way to celebrate 10 years and tell that story? So we looked at it, and we had 38 barrels from that, you know, single season to select from to get down to that 2000.
Have they been identified ahead of time as possibly for bottled and bonds? I know there's very strict rules about it, so it just happens to, like, can you retroactively pick a barrel to do that, or you have to ahead of time say this is going to be bottled and bond?
Oh no, you can pick it at any point. It just has to have been made in that single season. Right. Yeah. So we didn't like mark the barrels years ago. It was like when it gets to be 4 years old in that same season, et cetera, we just decided let's also do single farm. So we went one step extra to say single season, single distillery, single barrels, but also let's look at single farm, and let's tell a story about that farm. So when you get that box that we put it in, there's a little booklet in the back, and it goes all through the Jimmy Red story and all that. But then it shows a photo of our farmers and tells their story and talks about that sort of adventure along with us.
This is really good.
So that was 13 barrels total that we selected out of that 38 barrels for that offering. That was where we started. So that bottled and bond that you're tasting, fast forward a couple of years, and we are now, we've got roughly 3 farms that we're creating that batch. Our batches are typically 6 to 10 barrels.
Okay.
And you use the word batch. That's where the word, I mean, it always confused me when you saw at the store, you'd see single barrel and then you'd see small batch. And I'm like looking at these brands and I'm like, those guys are huge. What do they call a small batch?
Right. There's no regulation on what small batch is. Right.
Right. So what I came to realize is it's not from a single batch, like making it. It's from a single batch of barrels that I call it blend together.
Yeah.
We don't use blend in the American whiskey world because of blended whiskey like Canadian or blended scotches or whatever. So it's batched. So mingled, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah,
sexy.
batch sounds way more, American than blended. Now that the Scotch, the blended Scotch kind of has its own connotations. I feel like batch just has a different brand to it.
Right. So
Yeah.
this was our batches are typically 6 to 10. Most of them sort of fall in that 6 to 7 barrels. Our tank will only hold 10,
Okay.
so we're kind of stuck
It's
there
got to
until
be in
we.
that range. Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, it's very micro focused, and we barrel
Beautiful.
by farm. So if you get a single barrel from us, you're also usually getting a single farm. So it's grown, so it's like we can link it back to
Yeah.
it's you can kind of talk about the seasons and things of that nature. So it's pretty cool if you want to get nerdy with it. We're getting nerdier as we go forward, and the plan is to get even more nerdy with it. But yeah, ultimately that's the sort of how
This is
the
one of
whiskey program's building, if you will.
this is one of the
But
smoothest bottle bonds I've had in a while. Um, it's probably coming from that oiliness, but this is delicious. This is really good.
thanks. Yeah, you see what I mean about going from the classic to that.
Hmm.
It's like it's a definite step up, and it's just a little bit more time in the barrel. Maybe another year.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is like we're releasing some more 7-year-old this fall. And if you get a single barrel from us in the tasting room or from one of the folks that, we sell a few single barrels throughout the year, you're getting usually cask strength. And, we tend to, like, as we get older, start to pepper out a little bit of that older. So it's kind of
Yeah.
in that range of that bottled and bond, but also cask strength. And that's sort of where it's starting to, the worlds converge, and you really get like couple of steps up. And that's sort of another form of expression. We want to really shine a light on the grain, and we therefore aren't looking at multiple finishes and things of that nature. I
Yeah.
mean, if we were working with a sourced whiskey, for instance, how do we differentiate from another source whiskey? Well, we do, some different finishings, or we're thinking about ages and things of that. So, you kind of got to work within your palate. With us, we've got this thing that's, got this unique thing on its own. So our whole thing is, why do we really shouldn't do a whole lot beyond just seeing where that goes first before we start.
Yeah.
The only exception is, the Oloroso finish, and this newest one, which this label is here. I'm going to fix it. So we make peach brandy every year.
Uh-huh.
I know you're in Georgia. I'm going to break it to you. South Carolina is the second largest peach producer in the country, behind California. Sorry, Georgia's a
Yeah.
long, distant third.
It's more of a legacy historic thing at this point than anything else.
Yeah, well, they just marketing. They just grab that
We also definitely
trademark.
have more streets named Peach than anyone else, so I think
Yeah,
that's probably why we still have it.
right. So anyway, I'm sure if you had, when you can get fresh peaches where you live, those fresh picked roadside stand peaches are like, and you only can get them for about 6,
Yeah.
8 weeks a year. And so we just decided, being longtime South Carolina, both Ann and I were both raised in South Carolina. And we said, let's do a peach brandy. We had messed around with making other types of brandy, but we were like, this peach makes a lot of sense, because if we were in Washington State, we would be making apple brandy, but because we're here, we're making peach brandy. And we do it with a whole peach, skin, pit, the whole thing. And it ends up being About 4 to 6 barrels a year is all we can
Yeah.
lay. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's expensive. But what we discovered was when we dump those barrels and we sell off the peach brandy, we fill it with bourbon and let it sit for another year or so in those peach brandy barrels. It adds that whole peach flavor on the back end, which bourbon and peach goes together pretty well. So it's a lot of fun of kind of taking two things we're doing and mashing them up. Makes incredible juleps. I know we just finished the Derby.
Still a season. Still good.
Yeah. So peach brandy was in the original julep. The julep was not made with whiskey originally, and so we'll release some brandy this fall. We'll do our bottled and bond version of our peach brandy, which is the coup de grace, if you will. It is and if you want to make a true, really delicious julep, just make it out of that peach brandy,
Okay.
or you can make it really riff on an old fashioned or something like that. But it's cool. But anyway, that's the only other expression we've done with the Jimmy Red. Otherwise, the three you've got, that's where we put a lot of effort, and we're trying to improve that always. So batch 48, when you get batch 58, it should be even better.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, the story's amazing. I love the progression from figure out the grain all the way to, scientific experimentation on a massive scale. So thank you for sharing your story. The last question I like to always ask, when you're not drinking high wire stuff, what do you like to drink?
Well, I dance around pretty hard. I love trying other folks, especially whiskeys. I drink gin. I love gin. I like craft gins because I grew up drinking big brand gin, and I think a lot of the craft stuff is more natural, better tasting. I don't know. It's just, to me, I like and so as it's kind of like the craft beer.
Sure.
Where you go to different parts of the country and try gins. There's gins all, there's dozens, hundreds of gins now. So there's an adventure there. So I'll drink that when I'm drinking cocktails. But when I'm drinking whiskey, I tend to drink whiskey neat, or maybe with a little bit of water in it. Okay. And that's it. And I love rye. It was my introduction to rye was Willet, and I really enjoyed that. It was unique and a different flavor profile. Wilderness Trail, I really like their rye a lot. Peerless, Woody Creek. So all those different guys, I've enjoyed their ryes. And then bourbon wise, I'm not really dedicated to, some people are like, I like wheated bourbons, or I'm not really, I don't have that strong of an opinion about that. I just like good whiskey. So I think we're kind of coming into a really incredible moment where all these regional, smaller guys like us are starting to sort of get in the league of the big boys, like Kings County in New York. A lot of the guys I mentioned already. You've got their Dad's Hat in Pennsylvania making really good rye. So it's like, to me, it's kind of like craft beer back in the day where I'm like, I want an IPA tonight, or do I want do I want a Saison, or do I want a stout, and that's sort of how I approach whiskey. We don't have our back bar at the house probably has 40 bottles on it of whiskey, and they're all sort of I don't get on a brand and just that's all I drink, but I grew up, like I was saying, Ann was more of the bourbon drinker. Um, and she was a Maker's Mark person, loved Maker's Mark. And then, has evolved, and, she tends to like our, our rye a lot, and has, I
Yeah.
think, sort of gone down that path more. I don't know if that's answering your question,
Yeah.
because
No. Right on.
I'm not being political. It's just that I just, and I don't drink a lot of. I will say that I don't drink a lot of my own whiskey at night, because I'm trying to like check out. And if I'm drinking my own
It's your
stuff,
job. Yeah.
I'm like noticing the flaws, or I'm really dissecting it
Yeah.
as opposed to enjoying it. So,
Yeah.
I love sharing it and having other people, tell me, because, it's that's more fun for me.
Yeah. I get that for sure. For sure. Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you for the samples. Everyone, check out Jimmy Red on your. If you can find it locally, you can't always find it, but you can get it. Pour More sent it out, so be sure to subscribe to Pour More for more amazing bottles that we can find to send you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Uh,
for having me on. All right,
Bye.
man. Take care.